So my name is Brian Presti. I'm the owner and founder of Reason Test Prep. And let me start by just giving an overview of what we're going to talk about in the presentation. There'll be Q&A at the end, but so first of all, when and how to apply to graduate school. So I'm going to emphasize business school here. I have a feeling that's what most of you guys are interested in, but I will touch on other types of grad school also. Maybe some of you are not solely interested in business school or not at all. I mean, there's masters in you could be accounting degrees, and you might even not even be as interested in business school, at all. It could be journalism or something like that. So I'll try to comment on, there's also PhD programs, right? Like PhD in economics, things like that. So I'll try to touch on that stuff also, but the main thrust of this is going to be about business school. When to start prepping for the GMAT or GRE. We'll talk about both tests and a timeline for when to start studying and what your expectations should be for how long it'll take. Which test to take. So that's another question. We'll get into the details of this, but for business school, the GMAT has traditionally been a test, but the GRE is taken by all business schools at this point. So we'll get into how to decide even which test to take, how to prepare for the tests. I'll give you guys some tips and give you some resources and things that you can use to get ready for the test. And then, yeah, as I said before, we'll have a Q&A at the end. And so you can either chat questions. Amy can answer some of them, and then other questions she'll pass them to me when we get to the Q&A part. But if she can answer things during the presentation, she will. And then, yeah, well, I'll try to field whatever's remaining at the Q&A part. And then we'll also have like a verbal Q&A too, so you guys can verbally ask questions. You don't have to chat them. You can wait until that part and then just ask your questions. Okay. My background. So as I said, I'm the owner and founder of Reason Test Prep and Reason GMAT. So when I first started striking out on my own doing tutoring, I started with Reason GMAT, and I had a couple of other sites at that time, and more recently I've decided to merge all of that into Reason Test Prep. But the website isn't fully up yet, so it's a little confusing. But we have a landing page at Reason Test Prep, and then that kind of redirects to the other sites for now. But soon, in the next month or two, it'll be live Reason Test Prep, and that's really the main site. So I personally have been doing GMAT and GRE tutoring since 2003. So I've been doing this for a very long time. I've worked with many hundreds of students. I've been doing it online for about 10 years, well before COVID. I've sort of expanded, and we now have other tutors, and so it's a bigger operation now. But for me, it's been 2 decades really of doing this. One thing that sets us apart is we really place an emphasis on reasoning and critical thinking and problem solving. I'll talk about this more, but that's what the GMAT and GRE are really about. If you want to have a top score, you can, again, I'll get much more into the details of this, but you can, you can learn all the content you want and rules and formulas and things like that. But they're reasoning tests at their core, and so that's really been our emphasis. And yeah, again, in order to get a top score, that has to be the focus. There's just no way to get to a top score without really focusing on those elements. And yeah, as I said, I've personally tutored many hundreds of students, and we here at Reason Test Prep have helped hundreds of students gain admission to top MBA programs and other grad schools too. We do GMAT and GRE. I would just say that we tend to deal with people who have gone to top undergrad, Ivy League schools and things like that, and who are aiming for the top schools. I'd say, I mean, just for me personally, probably half the people I tutor are aiming for Harvard and Wharton and GSB. I mean, those schools. So yeah, it's typically the top 3 or 4 really that most of the people that we deal with are aiming for, but not all. We get people who are aiming for lower ranked schools as well. Okay. So let's get into the details. So when to apply to graduate school. So for So for business school, business schools like to see a few years, 2 or 3 years of work experience. I'll talk more about this. That's not necessarily true of other types of grad programs. So, yeah, I mean, if you're going for a PhD in something, and especially if you want to stay in academia, you can apply and go directly, right from college. But for business school, schools want to, they value the work experience, and they want to ready you for, for the working world. So they want to see work experience, and they want, you're doing internships over the summer between the years of business school. So the experience is a big part of it, and they want to make sure that when you graduate, that you're going to be able to go off and get a great job. So it's unlike other types of grad schools where really the work experience is important. That said, there are deferred admission programs like HBS and GSB, but a lot of schools now have these deferred admission programs. So HBS has like the 2+2 program, and so in these programs you can apply while you're still in college, and then attend a couple years later, basically. I'll talk more about that in a second. So yeah, so how do you decide then between regular admission? I mean, a lot of you are not still in college, so this obviously doesn't apply to you, but just quickly for those of you who are still in college, how do you decide between doing one of these deferred admission programs or just waiting until you have a couple years of work experience? Well, it's a couple factors. Really, this is kind of funny, but I mean, it's kind of what are you when are you most attractive, basically, right? So if you think you've peaked in college, and you got impressive grades, and you think you're super impressive where you stand in college, then you might want to try to do a deferred admission. But if you think that you need some time to build your resume, get some work experience, and you think you're gonna really look much better 2 or 3 years out, well then you're probably better off waiting. But yeah, again, for some of you, obviously it's irrelevant. If you've already graduated, then that ship has already sailed. The other thing is, if you're going to take a non-traditional career path, so if you're in college and you look great, on paper right now, and you think you'd have a good chance, but you want to do something a little bit different, where you think that 2 or 3 years from now, schools might not love what you've done with your life in those 2 or 3 years. Well, then again, it might be better to try to get in while you're senior in college. So it's senior year that you apply. We'll talk about the deadlines for the schools in a minute. And then the last thing is, as I said before, if you're applying for other types of master's or PhD programs, a lot of these you do apply straight out of college. So senior year you apply, yeah, again, especially if you're going to stay in academia, then it's the PhD programs. Usually you do that senior year of college. Okay. How do grad schools, especially business schools, again, I'm trying to broaden this and not just talk about business school, but especially business schools, how do they evaluate applicants? So as we talked about, work experience, obviously that's important. Leadership and interpersonal skills, that's important as well. And there's a variety of ways that schools get at that. So resume, letters of recommendation, you have to write essays, there's interviews. If you get that far, there'll be interviews. So that's one way that they evaluate those qualities. Demographics. So this is important for business schools, maybe less so, probably a lot less so for other types of grad programs, but for business school, if you come from an over or underrepresented group or industry, that can either help or hurt. So I personally tutor a fair number of Indian males who are engineers. That's tough because that's such an overrepresented group. If you're a white guy in finance who grew up in New York City and live in New York City, again, you're competing against a pretty deep pool, and so it's a bit harder because they want diversity, and they only want so many people from each of these groups. So if you're lucky enough to be in an underrepresented group, it's a little bit easier, and that's going to relate to the scores too. So another thing is academic ability, especially quantitative. So your college transcript is one part of that. Your GMAT and GRE scores is the other main part of that. And yeah, the schools tend to be a bit more interested. I mean, the overall score is the most important thing, but the quantitative part of that score is second most important. So they care more about your quantitative ability for obvious reasons. It's business school than they do about your verbal ability. And again, this is especially an issue if you come from an overrepresented group where people have really high scores and really high quantitative scores, then you need to be in that ballpark. And then last thing, why did test scores matter so much? So there's an obvious part of this, which is just it's a standard basis for comparison. Obviously, you know, it's hard to compare even grades from, you know, top schools. It's hard to say, you know, what an A means at one school versus an A at another school. So obviously it's a level playing field on the GMAT and GRE. And even the GMAT and GRE scores themselves can be converted. So you can take a GRE score and compare it to a GMAT score, you know, with accuracy. So it's a way to really compare candidates. But the other thing is that, as I said before, the tests are really a measure of a person's problem-solving ability and critical thinking ability. And so that's just something that it's hard for schools to gauge, and they care about that because that's important in, you know, in the business world and in business school. So that's the other part of it is I think they want GMAT and GRE scores because it's a way for them to know what a person's, you know, problem solving and reasoning ability is. Okay. When to start preparing for the tests. So again, this depends a little bit on your situation. So obviously, if you're going to go for a deferred admission program, then, you know, you're going to be preparing in college. But even if you're aiming for regular admission, you could prepare in college, or you could prepare once you start working. So again, this isn't relevant to some of you who already have graduated, but scores are good for 5 years. And so I'd say that, you know, if you have a window of opportunity when you can study, if you think you're going to be applying within 5 years, which that's most people, even in seniors in college, then it's, you know, best to get it out of the way when you don't have a full plate. And, you know, if you're going to go into like investment banking or consulting or something really demanding, then yeah, it's nice to get it out of the way when you can. So either that's in college, if you have the opportunity to do that, or if you're going to be in between jobs at a certain point, it's good to try to knock out the tests at that point. The deadlines, you guys may know this or may not, but regular deadline, so round one is September, October. Some schools now have rolling, like Columbia has a rolling admission, so you can actually apply, like, I guess probably not before September, October, but I'm actually not sure when the rolling opens, but certainly you can apply in between round one and round two, and some other schools have that too. But traditionally there's a round one, round two, round three. So September, October, then first or second week of January, and then April. The thing to understand is that round 1 and 2 are both, you know, fairly equal. There's a big drop off in round 3 in terms of your chances of getting in. So, you know, if you're thinking of applying, I mean, it's July now. We'll talk about the timeline for studying, but, you know, there's still opportunity to be ready for round 1 and you know, round 2 as well. But if you need a lot of time to get the application together and to get the score that you want, there are definitely people who would start prepping now and not really even be ready by round 2. And then at that point, you probably want to wait until the following year. I think someone might have their mic not muted. I don't know if anyone's getting that echo, but okay, I think that did. Anyway. So yeah, so in some cases it might be worth just still applying round 3. In other cases, admissions consultants would tell you to wait until the following year. And then for deferred admissions, it's usually in April for, I think, all the schools. So, you know, April of senior year, basically. And then time frame for studying. Now, this really depends obviously a lot on, you know, where your starting point is. And I mean, if you know, the average score at the top schools is about 730-ish. That's the top schools, right? So I mean, rung below that, you know, you have a good chance with a high 600 score. Even at some of the top schools, you still have a chance with very good chance, you know, with, say, a high 600 score. But if you're starting at a 550 and you want a 750, well, it's going to take a while. I mean, you might not even get there, that kind of a jump. On the GMAT, and sorry, case anyone's not familiar with this, but the scores go from 200 to 800, like the SAT. The GRE is scored a little bit differently. But anyway, I'd say 6 months is a good amount of time to leave for yourself. It could be much faster than that if you're already at a pretty high score, but definitely we see people who need more time than that, sometimes significantly more. So yeah, sometimes that's not even enough. And I wrote in there, beware of the end of senior year. Yeah, like I've tutored people who are doing great. They're seniors in college, and everything's going great. And then it's like March or April, and all of a sudden the wheels just come flying off the bus because it's like graduation time and party time, and they just basically fall off the wagon completely. So, and similar thing would be true of work. I'll come back to this, but obviously if you know that your busy time is the fall, well, obviously it makes sense to try to prepare for the test in the winter and spring or something, and try to get it well out of the way before your busy time. Yeah, and then there's you have to also leave time for essays and recommendations and the whole application process. So again, like starting now would probably be okay for round 2 deadlines, but that could even be tight for some people, between studying for the test, taking the tests, and then all the other stuff that you have to do for the application. Again, some people would maybe knock it out really quickly and they wouldn't need that much time, but I think 6 months is a good amount of time to leave. Okay, about the GMAT and the GRE. So again, this might be obvious knowledge to some of you, but the GMAT is for business school. That is a traditional business school admissions test. The GRE used to be so you had the GMAT for business school, you had the LSAT for law school, you had the MCAT for medical school, and then basically the GRE was for everything else, including veterinary school. I don't know why the MCAT wouldn't be for that, but the GRE is still the test for veterinary school. And so that's the way it was. And then about 10 years ago, things started to change, and the GRE actually overhauled itself. And part of that was to try to make the test better and something that business schools would accept, and they did soon after they changed it. It started with a few, and then basically all of them. So now the GRE is accepted at business schools. I think all business schools, and most of them say they don't have a preference. We'll come back to that. I think they have a slight preference for a GMAT score, but slight. So we see a lot of people who take the GRE for business school. I've personally seen a lot of people get into top business schools with the GRE. So if it's business school, you could do either one. And then now, I don't know if any of you are have any thoughts of law school, but that's also, the GRE is also now accepted at many, not all, but many of the top law schools. So the GRE is really like for basically everything but medical school at this point, whereas the GMAT is specifically for business school, and that's it. They're both computer adaptive tests. So I won't go into all the details on this, but basically they adapt to whether you're getting questions right or wrong. So questions will get harder generally if you're getting them right, they get easier if you're getting them wrong. And it's a way for the test to be more accurate because it can really kind of aim the questions and then get into a very narrow range where it really can target or pinpoint exactly where you are within that narrow range, as opposed to giving you like a shotgun blast of just questions all over the map. It's harder to be precise that way. So they're both computer adaptive tests, or on the computer. It's not that big a deal, but there is definitely some strategy to how to maximize the way the algorithms work on the tests. They're offered every day. Both are available online now, so you do them at home online. You do them in person at a test center. In person is a little harder to get a seat, so you have to plan in advance. I'd say you probably want 4 to 6 weeks in advance to book a seat, although you can sometimes get cancellations like the week of, so it's not like you can't get it, but you probably want to leave yourself 4 to 6 weeks. The online is available pretty much all the time, so if you wanted to take the GMAT in 2 days, you could sign up for that and you'd be able to do that online. Same with the GRE. As I said, they both test quantitative and verbal reasoning, with a stress on the word reasoning. There's differences between the tests. I won't go into all the nuance of that. right now, but basically the core of both tests is quantitative. There's a quantitative reasoning part and a verbal reasoning part, and then essays. The essays essentially don't really matter very much. You have to do them, but the schools don't really care much about it. So it's almost entirely the quantitative and verbal reasoning stuff that they have to deal with. I can speak more about that if you guys want, about how the scoring works and the sections, but that's the broad picture. And then finally, the scoring. So again, GMAT and GRE scores a little bit different. They can be converted. There's an easy converter that ETS, the company that makes the GRE, has on their website. It reliably converts. I'm sure it's what business schools use, that convert a GRE to a GMAT score. But you know what the most important thing to understand is that what matters is how your score compares to others, and specifically the demographic that you're in. So if the demographic that you're in, the industry you're in, race, ethnicity, things like that, if those people tend to score, 680, well, then if you're at a 700, you look better than those people. If you're in a demographic where people typically score 750, well, then a 710, which would otherwise be a great score, doesn't look quite as good. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, just again, I can go into much more detail on a lot of these topics, but between the GMAT and GRE, there is definitely a myth that the GRE is easier, because the quantitative section is a bit easier. But first of all, the verbal section is probably harder, so it probably nets out. But even if that weren't true, again, what matters is how you perform relative to other people. So if the quantitative section of the GRE is quote easy, well, it's easy for everyone, and you still have to outperform all the same people who you're trying to outperform on the GMAT. So it doesn't even matter that it's any easier. At the end of the day, you just need to be better than the rest of your cohort. So it's a myth that, oh, I should just do the GRE because the GRE is easier. If you guys have questions about that, I can certainly go on in detail about that. Okay, how to decide which test to take. So first thing is, are you certain that you want business school? That's an obvious first decision. If you're not totally sure, don't take the GMAT, because now you're obviously boxed into business school. I would say you should be about 90% sure that you want business school, or more. Otherwise, I think if you're south of 90%, I would probably say just take the GRE. This way you still have options. You can take an official diagnostic test of each. Do an official one. Don't do a Kaplan one or anything like that. You want an official test. MBA.com is where you can find the free GMAT official one. ETS.com is where the GRE official tests are. There's 2 free ones for each. So that's, take one of each and compare. But don't just compare your scores. You also want to look at the the differences in the test and how you felt, and try to project out what might happen in time. So for example, the GRE has a calculator, an on-screen calculator. The GMAT does not. Now again, people are like, oh my God, calculator, like I should take the GRE. But again, everyone else has a calculator. So that doesn't really help you, because it helps everyone in the same way. Now, if at first you're like, oh, the calculator was so important, I couldn't have done this without it, that might be true. But the question is, are you good at mental math? Would you be ultimately fine without the calculator once you get used to it? Because if you're better than other people without a calculator, then the GMAT might ultimately be a better test. So you don't want to just compare to the scores. You want to think about how you would improve on the skills, because there's slightly different skills that are tested. Like the verbal section of the GMAT has grammar-based questions, whereas the verbal section of the GRE has vocabulary-based questions. So if you're like, well, I didn't know any of the words, but I can memorize thousands of words easily, again, GRE might be better. If you're on the fence and you're applying to business school, I would just say take the GMAT. Again, schools seem to have a slight preference for business schools, have a slight preference for the GMAT. It's also easier to go GMAT to GRE than it is to go GRE to GMAT. So I personally have tutored, just in the last year, probably 3 people who, prepped for the GMAT. We thought the GMAT was the right test. Seemed like things were going well. Ultimately, they just didn't quite get the score that they wanted. We pivoted to the GRE. It was a fast pivot. Within a month, they were taking the GRE and then getting a great GRE score. So it's not that hard to pivot from GMAT to GRE. It's a little harder to go the other way. Okay, how to prepare for the tests. So there are live courses. You could do a in-person live course with a live teacher, or an online live course. I personally don't think these are that great. I've taught courses live, in-person and online courses, and you just sort of have to pitch to the middle. You can't only help the people who are at the top end of the spectrum, and you can't help the people on the bottom. You have to sort of aim for the middle, sort of. And so a lot of people just kind of get left out. So I don't personally think that's a great option, but some people just like the idea of having a physical teacher in person. So that's one option. On-demand courses. So these are, the kind where you watch, there's modules and you're watching video lessons, or there's written stuff that you read, and then there's practice questions, and it's all online. A lot of companies have this now. Magoosh is one, Target Test Prep for the GMAT is another. Manhattan Prep has both a GMAT and a GRE one. We sometimes leverage these in our tutoring. So we only do private tutoring, but we will use whatever resources are the most effective resources we can use. So sometimes we will leverage, Manhattan Prep, GRE on-demand course for someone who is not going to do a ton of tutoring and needs a lot of work outside and likes the idea of that method of learning. So anyway, there are others, but these are some of the better ones, I would say. Obviously, there's private tutoring. That's going to be the most expensive option. Obviously, it's you're getting everything catered directly to your needs. It's probably the best option, but obviously also the most expensive. There are a lot of books and resources out there. I'm happy. I'll put my email address up later, but I'm happy to share some of the specifically if people have questions about some of these resources. But there are lots of again, we leverage them in our tutoring too. Certain books and question pools and things like that. And then finally, there are forums that are just a wealth of information now. GMAT Club is the one that I use the most. Again, I often have my students using it as well for a variety of purposes, but it's a great source for really everything. I mean, practice questions and resources, but also just advice, and it's everything a forum you'd expect of a forum, and it's very well funded and populated with I know some of the tutors who post there a lot, so it's a great resource. Other study tips. You need to have a realistic timeline. I was hinting at this before, but you need to think about the interferences that are going to come. So again, in college, forget about getting anything done from April through mid to end of May if you're a senior in college, and better to be done before that. Otherwise, you're going to have a 2-month interruption in your process. And same thing with work. If you can anticipate when things are going to get in the way, you obviously want to try to plan around that. Also, I didn't mention this before, but you have to plan for retakes. So very rare that people take these tests one time. I'd say most people take them, probably 2 or 3, but probably 3 is really average. There is a waiting period between tests. So for the GRE, it's 21 days. For the GMAT, it's 16 days. So it's not like you can just take it and then take it again a day later. It takes a few weeks really to retake. So you have to build that into your planning. This is a key thing. Get help early on, even if it's only for a study plan. I can't tell you how many times people come to me and after the first meeting, they're like, I wish that I had done this 3 months ago, because I basically was, trying to do this on my own, and I just didn't, it's not even just the tutoring, it's just not even knowing what resources to use or understanding the real essence of the test and how to prepare for it. So I'd say get help early, even if it's just to get direction. And then if you want to take the ball and run with it, I think that's great. But I would say the guidance that you can get from experts, not just tutoring, but an on-demand course or something like that will help put you point you in the right direction with things. This contradicts a little bit what I just said about an on-demand course, but you want to rely mostly on official questions and official tests. That's one of the drawbacks of using a live course or an on-demand course, is that those companies are going to, they're not going to really, they can't use official questions and official tests for, it's blanking on the word, but it would be illegal to do so. So they have to create their own questions and their own tests and stuff like that, and they're not as accurate. So that's one of the drawbacks of using those things. And so you do have to be a little bit careful that you're not getting too jaded by the types of questions and things you see from these companies. So it's it's good to use those things as a resource to learn the strategies and learn the content, but it's good to practice with official questions and practice with official tests. And for the GRE, unfortunately, there isn't quite as much. For the GMAT, there's almost an unending number of questions and tests out there. It's pretty rare to like run out of resources for the GMAT. A little harder for the GRE. Again, stressing this now, I think for the third or fourth time, it's a reasoning test. You can't study for it like you're studying for, a history test where it's memorizing, dates and things like that. It's about problem solving ability and critical thinking ability. So you have to keep that in focus at all times. And the last thing is be your own tutor. Don't just go through the motions, especially if you are doing a course or even if you have a tutor. It's easy to just like do the work kind of in a busybody sort of way, but not be really reflect on what you're doing, what's working, what's not working, and really being very thoughtful and mindful about what you should change in your process. And so, I mean, this is what we do. This is guiding the whole process is part of what we do at recent test prep. But even when we do, it's still better, when the students can do that for themselves also, so that you're not even if you have a tutor or if you have some kind of guidance from a course or whatever, that you're making adjustments in between all of those meetings, right? So the more of that you can do, the better, really. Okay, so resources for more information. I'll try to wrap this up so I can take questions if there are any. GMAT Club, I already mentioned. It's not just great for GMAT information, it's also great for business school information. But Poets and Quants is another great resource that is more oriented towards like business school applications and the differences between the business schools. They both are good resources for learning more about admissions consultants, for example. So that's my second point here. We at Recent Test Prep, we are test people. That's all we do. We don't do any admissions consulting, but I can personally make recommendations if any of you guys are interested in admissions consultants. So you can contact me offline. Happy to give you some names, but especially in Poets and Quants, there's reviews of all the top admissions consultants, and GMAT Club has that also to a little bit lesser extent. So they're great resources for general information. And then I'm here to help. Brian at reasontestprep.com. That's my email address, and happy to steer you guys in the right direction.